secret, and I wasn't to tell anyone. And then I didn't see him for about 4 years.
Pattie Boyd was not born into fame, but life had something extraordinary planned for her. In her younger years, she worked as a shampoo girl in a small salon in London, never imagining that one day she would become one of the most recognizable faces of the 1960s. With her golden blonde hair, blue eyes that sparkled under the camera lights, and a natural charm, she quickly caught the attention of fashion photographers. Soon, her face appeared on the covers of famous magazines such as Vogue and Vanity Fair. She became one of the symbols of the swinging 60s, the decade when London's music, fashion, and art scene were at their peak. Yet, behind all the glamour of modeling and the flashing lights of cameras, Pattie's life was about to change forever. In 1964, she was offered a small acting role as a schoolgirl in A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles' first film. There, she met George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, who was shy but immediately taken by her beauty. Their meeting was like something out of a fairy tale. Harrison asked her out, and within 2 years, they were married. On January 21, 1966, Pattie Boyd became the wife of a Beatle, and the world looked at them as one of the most glamorous couples of the decade. But the reality inside their marriage was very different from the public image, and it would set the stage for the struggles that defined much of Pattie's life. At first, marriage to George Harrison seemed like a dream. He was one of the most famous musicians in the world, admired by millions, and Pattie thought she had stepped into a life of love and happiness. But very soon, cracks began to appear. At Harrison's request, Pattie gave up her modeling career, which at that time was reaching new heights. She loved George and wanted to please him, but leaving behind her independence made her feel trapped. She later admitted it was like being placed inside a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but lonely within. Harrison, who was deeply exploring Indian spirituality and meditation, started to grow distant. Instead of focusing on his marriage, he drifted away, often neglecting Pattie. Worse still, he became unfaithful, having affairs with several women. The most painful betrayal came when Pattie discovered that Harrison was having an affair with Maureen Starkey, the wife of Ringo Starr, his bandmate and close friend. Pattie described the moment she walked into a room at their home and found Maureen lying casually on the bed, as if her presence meant nothing. It was a humiliating and crushing experience that shook her deeply. Although she loved George, she realized their marriage was falling apart. This longing for affection and emotional connection made her vulnerable to another man who had been quietly obsessed with her George's close friend, Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, had already built his reputation as a rock legend by the late 1960s. But beyond the fame and the music, he was hopelessly in love with Pattie Boyd, his best friend's wife. Clapton's feelings were no secret among those who knew him closely. Friends recalled how he would talk endlessly about Pattie, as if under a spell. His obsession grew so intense that he began to express it through music. By 1969, Clapton's emotions reached a breaking point. He wrote an anonymous love letter to Pattie, signing it only with the initial E. The letter was desperate and full of passion, telling her he would give up everything just to be with her. Pattie immediately knew it was from Clapton, and instead of hiding it, she showed it to George Harrison. The situation led to a dramatic confrontation. Harrison struck Clapton, but Clapton only responded by saying, "Then let me have her." The intensity of his love, mixed with frustration, drove Clapton into a downward spiral of heroin addiction. Out of this pain came one of rock's most iconic songs, Layla, inspired by an ancient Persian love story. Clapton poured all his agony into the music. The song became a cry of forbidden love, with the lyrics expressing his yearning for Pattie. When she first heard it, she admitted she was so overwhelmed she could not even speak. The world saw it as one of the greatest love songs ever written. But for Pattie, it was the beginning of a complicated and painful new chapter in her life. By the early 1970s, Pattie's marriage to George Harrison was beyond repair. He had grown increasingly distant, more focused on his spiritual journey and other relationships than on his wife. Meanwhile, Clapton's obsession with Pattie grew stronger. In 1970, during a party, Clapton shocked everyone by publicly declaring to George, "I have to tell you, I'm in love with your wife." This bold confession was uncomfortable for everyone present, and it marked a point of no return. Although Harrison and Clapton managed to remain publicly friendly, the tension between them never fully went away. Pattie herself described moments where Harrison would only show his jealousy through his guitar, almost as if their rivalry played out in music. Eventually, in 1974, Pattie left Harrison and began a relationship with Clapton. To the world, this was the resolution of one of rock's most famous love triangles. Harrison even attended their wedding in 1979 and jokingly referred to Clapton as "my husband." On the surface, it seemed as though the three had managed to stay friends. But behind the curtain, the story was very different. Clapton, though free from heroin, quickly sank into another destructive habit. This marked the beginning of a dark and turbulent marriage that Pattie would later reveal was filled with pain. Pattie Boyd's marriage to Eric Clapton was nothing like the happy ending people imagined. Although Clapton had overcome his heroin addiction by the time they married, he fell deeply into alcoholism. When sober, He could be gentle, caring, and deeply affectionate, but alcohol transformed him into someone else entirely. He became angry, violent, and unfaithful. Pattie described living with him as living with two men in one body, the tender genius and the cruel drunk. The marriage was further strained by their struggle with infertility. Both longed for children, and they tried IVF treatments, but each failure broke Pattie a little more. She described it as a repeated humiliation that drained her of every emotion. Just when she was at her most vulnerable, Clapton betrayed her in the cruelest way. In 1985, Pattie discovered that he had fathered a daughter, Ruth, with another woman, Yvonne Kelly. Only a year later, he had another child, Connor, with Italian actress Lori Del Santo. These betrayals were devastating, as Pattie longed for children of her own but could not conceive, while her husband fathered children with other women. By the mid-1980s, the marriage had become unbearable. Pattie finally left Clapton and their divorce was finalized in 1989. She later admitted that after years of being defined as either George's wife or Eric's wife, she no longer knew who she was. She felt completely lost and invisible. Leaving Eric Clapton was not just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of Pattie Boyd reclaiming her identity. For decades, she had lived in the shadows of two of the greatest musicians in history. She was admired and immortalized in songs, but rarely seen as her own person. After her divorce, Pattie began to rebuild her life. She turned to therapy, which helped her deal with the deep wounds caused by years of betrayal and neglect. Slowly, she rediscovered her love for photography, something she had always been passionate about but had put aside during her marriages. With her camera, she captured the world around her in raw and honest images. Unlike the glamorous photos of her modeling days, her work now reflected her life experiences, the loneliness, the survival, and the strength she had gained. She began to exhibit her photographs in galleries, and for the first time, people began to see Pattie Boyd not just as a muse, but as an artist in her own right. In 2007, she published her memoir, Wonderful Tonight, named after the famous song Clapton wrote for her. The book was a revelation. Fans who had romanticized her marriages were shocked to learn the painful reality behind the love songs. But for Pattie, the memoir was more than just a story. It was her way of reclaiming her voice after decades of silence. As Pattie Boyd entered her 70s, she found something she had never truly experienced in her earlier marriage. In 2015, she married Rod Weston, a property developer and longtime friend. Unlike her previous relationships, this marriage was not surrounded by fame, drugs, or music legends. It was quiet and simple. Their wedding at Chelsea Town Hall was modest, with only close friends and family present. For the first time, Pattie was not marrying a man defined by the world's spotlight, but someone who respected her as an individual. She described life with Rod as peaceful and steady. No more fears of betrayal, no more drunken outbursts, and no more being reduced to just a muse. Instead, she finally found companionship, mutual respect, and the simple joys of everyday life. This shift showed how far Pattie had come from the glamorous but painful decades she spent with George and Eric. Happiness was no longer about being adored by the world, but about finding someone who treated her with kindness and respect. Today, looking back at her life at the age of 80, Pattie Boyd's story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. Pattie Boyd's life story is one of beauty, music, love, heartbreak, and survival. Born in 1944 in England, she grew up in a time when fashion, culture, and music were about to change the world forever. By the early 1960s, she had become one of the most famous models of her generation. With her blonde hair, shining smile, and natural charm, she perfectly fit the image of the swinging London era. She appeared in magazines and advertisements that made her a star in the fashion world. But her life would not just be about modeling. In 1964, while working on the set of A Hard Day's Night, a film by the Beatles, Pattie Boyd met George Harrison. Harrison was quiet, shy, and deeply talented, and the two quickly fell in love. Within 2 years, she had left her modeling career behind and became George's wife. She was suddenly not just a model anymore, but the partner of one of the most famous musicians in the world. From this point on, Pattie Boyd's life would become tied to the world of rock and roll in ways she never expected. While she lived a glamorous life on the outside, inside she would face challenges that would test her strength for decades. When Pattie married George Harrison in 1966, many fans thought it was a fairy tale. She was beautiful, he was a Beatle, and together they looked like the perfect couple. George even wrote one of the greatest love songs of all time, Something, inspired by Pattie. The song remains a classic, and Frank Sinatra once called it the greatest love song ever written. Yet, their marriage was not as perfect as it seemed. Life with the Beatle was filled with pressure, attention, and endless travel. George was deeply involved in music and spirituality, and sometimes Pattie felt left behind. Worse, George was not always faithful. Like many rock stars of the time, he had affairs, and Pattie often felt neglected. Even though she loved him deeply, she began to realize that being the wife of a superstar was not easy. The public saw glamour and romance, but behind closed doors, there was loneliness and pain. Still, Pattie stayed with George for years, trying to make the marriage work. Their relationship, however, would soon face another test, this time from someone close to both of them. Another famous musician who also loved Pattie, Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, met Pattie while she was still married to George. He became deeply obsessed with her, even though she was his friend's wife. His feelings for Pattie grew stronger, and he began writing songs about her. His most famous one, Layla, was directly inspired by her. The song tells the story of a man madly in love with a woman he cannot have, and it remains one of rock's most powerful love songs. At first, Pattie ignored Clapton's advances. She was loyal to George, even though their marriage was struggling. But Clapton's obsession grew darker. He fell into drug addiction, using heroin to escape the pain of wanting Pattie. His life spun out of control, but his passion for her only deepened. In a shocking move, he even wrote a letter to Pattie, begging her to leave George and be with him. She refused. Yet, this triangle between George, Eric, and Pattie would only grow more complicated, leading to heartbreak, betrayal, and years of suffering. After years of struggle, Pattie finally left George Harrison in 1974. By then, their relationship had fallen apart, and George had also grown closer to other women. Soon after, she began a relationship with Eric Clapton. Many thought this would be her chance at happiness. After all, Clapton had adored her for years, and he had written music that immortalized his love. In 1979, Pattie married Clapton, but the fairy tale did not last. Clapton, despite his love, was fighting serious demons. He was addicted to alcohol and drugs, and his behavior was often cruel and violent. The man who once worshipped Pattie began cheating on her and humiliating her. She dreamed of having children, but their attempts at IVF were unsuccessful, and she faced the pain of infertility. Meanwhile, Clapton fathered a child with another woman while still married to Pattie, leaving her devastated. Her marriage became filled with sadness, betrayal, and emotional abuse. The beautiful muse who inspired songs like Layla and Wonderful Tonight was left broken and alone inside. On the outside, Pattie Boyd's life seemed glamorous. She was married to two of the most famous musicians in history. She was the woman who inspired legendary songs sung across the world. Yet, behind the cameras and music, her private life was filled with pain. She suffered from loneliness, betrayal, and emotional wounds that left deep scars. To the world, she was the muse, the beautiful face behind the music. But in reality, she was struggling with rejection, infertility, and heartbreak. Her story shows the difference between public image and private truth. Fame may look like happiness, but behind closed doors, the reality can be very different. Pattie herself later admitted in interviews that she felt invisible and unloved during those years. She was used as inspiration, but her own needs and desires were often ignored. Her story is a powerful reminder that the lives of celebrities are not always what they appear to be. After her painful marriage to Clapton ended in divorce in 1999, Pattie Boyd had to find herself again. For so many years, she had been known only as George Harrison's wife or Eric Clapton's muse. But now, she wanted her own identity. She returned to her love of photography and art, finding a new way to express herself. She also began to speak openly about her past, writing a memoir where she told her side of the story. This honesty gave her freedom and helped her heal. For the first time in decades, she was not just the woman behind the music, but a person with her own voice and story. Eventually, she found happiness again, marrying property developer Rod Weston in 2015. With him, she found peace and stability, something she had never truly known before. By the time she turned 80, Pattie Boyd had lived through incredible highs and painful lows, but she had also shown great resilience. Her life became a lesson in survival, reminding the world that behind every glamorous picture is a real person with real struggles. Today, when people look back at Pattie Boyd's life, they see a woman who inspired some of the greatest music of the 20th century. Without her, songs like Layla, Something, and Wonderful Tonight might never have existed. She shaped the soundtrack of an entire generation. Yet, her legacy is not just about being a muse. It is also